The Great Hall in Nexus Prime felt cold and empty. Ambassador Zethkar looked at the 12 empty chairs where humans used to sit. His 4 eyes moved slowly across each vacant seat. The silence hurt more than any battle cry. 3 months had passed since the last human ship left known space. No goodbye, no warning, just gone. One day they were there arguing about trade routes and military budgets. The next day their colonies were empty, and their ships had vanished into the void. Kate Sullivan had been the last human anyone had spoken to. She was captain of a patrol ship near the border systems. Her final message came through broken and strange, something about signals from beyond the galaxy edge. Then nothing but static and silence. The Council tried to reach human space for weeks. Every call went unanswered. Every probe sent back images of empty cities and dark spaceports. It was like an entire species had simply decided to leave the galaxy behind. Zethkar remembered the last Council meeting with humans present. Captain Ryan Mitchell had slammed his fist on the table during a debate about defensive strategies. The human had said something about always being ready to fight dirty when the time came. The other species had rolled their eyes or shaken their heads. Humans were always talking about fighting dirty. Now the Drakthari swarm was coming and nobody knew how to fight dirty anymore. The first reports had come in just 2 weeks after humanity vanished. Strange bioships appeared at the galaxy edge where human patrol fleets used to guard the borders. These ships were not built but grown. They ate metal and drank energy. They moved through space like hungry animals. Admiral Velthon of the Altarian Navy stood before the Council now. His blue skin had gone pale with worry. He held a data pad with the latest battle reports. The news was bad and getting worse. The Drakthari have taken 17 systems in the past month, he said. His voice carried the weight of defeat. Our fleets cannot stop them. Every time we engage them in battle, they adapt and grow stronger. The Cerulean representative asked about casualties. The numbers made everyone in the room feel sick. Entire worlds had gone silent. Billions of lives lost without even slowing the enemy advance. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had written papers about human military tactics 5 years ago. Her research sat in the Council archives gathering dust. She had studied how humans fought differently from every other species in the galaxy. Where others saw rules, humans saw suggestions. Where others planned careful moves, humans created chaos and rode it to victory. The Council had dismissed her work as too violent and unpredictable. Civilized warfare had rules and limits. Humans ignored both and somehow won battles they should have lost. Lisa Barnes used to command a human destroyer called the Defiant. She had once attacked a pirate stronghold by ramming her ship through their shields at full speed. Her crew had boarded the enemy station while both ships were still exploding around them. The pirates surrendered rather than face humans who fought like insane people. The Council military advisors had called it reckless and stupid. They preferred long-range attacks and careful positioning, clean battles with minimal risk and acceptable losses. Human tactics looked like suicide runs and desperate last stands. Now those suicide runs seemed like the only thing that might work against an enemy that ate starships for breakfast. Captain Jake Morrison had shown the Council something called a kamikaze attack during war games. He had loaded a small fighter with explosives and crashed it into a simulated enemy flagship. The enemy ship died, but so did Jake's fighter. The alien observers had been horrified at the waste of life and equipment. Jake had just smiled and said that sometimes you had to break expensive things to win important fights. The Council had banned such tactics from their military doctrine immediately. The Drakthari did not care about the Council's rules of war. They swarmed over defensive positions like insects. They turned captured ships into more biovessels. They consumed everything in their path and grew stronger with each victory. Marcus Davis had been a human general who specialized in what he called impossible situations. He would take missions that other commanders refused. His soldiers learned to fight when outnumbered 10-1. They won battles by doing things that military textbooks said could not work. Davis used to tell the Council that humans did not retreat. They just attacked in different directions. When surrounded, they fought their way out. When outgunned, they got creative. When facing certain death, they found ways to take the enemy with them. The Council had thought this was just human bragging. Now they wished they had listened more carefully to the bragging. Engineer Sam Turner had modified shield generators to overload and explode when enemies got too close. The Council engineers had called it dangerous and unstable. Sam had called it a surprise for anyone who thought they were safe. Amy Peterson had designed evacuation plans that moved entire populations in hours instead of days. She assumed that enemies would not give civilians time to pack their belongings. The council had thought her plans were too harsh and frightening. Now those harsh plans looked like the only way to save people from the advancing swarm. The bioships moved through space like living nightmares. They had no weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, they grew new parts as needed. Acid that could melt through hull armor, tentacles that could crush smaller ships, mouths that could swallow fighters whole. Council fleets tried to fight them using standard tactics. Keep distance, use long-range weapons, maintain formation discipline. The Drakthari ignored these rules and closed to melee range. They tangled ships in organic cables and pulled them apart like toys. Human ships had always been built for close combat. They carried Marines who could fight inside enemy vessels. They had redundant systems that kept working even when half the ship was destroyed. They were designed by people who expected things to go wrong and planned for it. The Council had always thought human ship designs were ugly and inefficient. Too much armor, too many weapons, not enough elegance. Now those ugly ships seemed beautiful in their absence. Zethkar looked around the Council chamber one more time. Representatives from 12 species sat in their assigned seats. They were all afraid and none of them knew what to do. The humans were gone, and had taken their useful madness with them. Outside the great windows of the chamber, stars that had shone for millions of years were going dark one by one. The Drakthari swarm was coming, and the galaxy was not ready to fight dirty. The Drakthari moved through space like a disease spreading through a healthy body. Their bioships had no engines that anyone could understand. They seemed to swim through the void using methods that made Council scientists feel dizzy just thinking about them. Admiral Velthon stood in the command center of his flagship watching the tactical display. Red dots marked enemy positions advancing through 7 different sectors at once. Each red dot represented a living ship the size of a space station. Some were even bigger. The bioships looked wrong in every way that mattered. They had surfaces that moved like breathing skin. They grew new parts while traveling through space. Some sprouted weapon pods like flowers blooming in fast motion. Others stretched out feeding tubes that could drain power from any ship they touched. Captain Nina Torres had once told the Council about human boarding tactics. She described how human Marines could take over an enemy ship from the inside, while the battle was still going on outside. Her soldiers would cut holes in hull plating and fight their way through corridors filled with smoke and sparks. The Council military advisors had been disgusted by such crude methods. Civilized warfare happened at a distance with clean energy weapons and proper protocols. Boarding actions were messy and unpredictable. Good commanders avoided them whenever possible. Now the Drakthari were boarding Council ships whether the crews wanted them to or not. The biovessels would latch onto smaller ships with organic clamps and then dissolve their way through the hull. Whatever came through those holes was not interested in taking prisoners. The Cerulean Defense Corps had tried to stop the advance at the Kepler station. 3 full battle groups had been positioned there with overlapping fields of fire and carefully planned withdrawal routes. The station itself was armed with plasma cannons that could destroy asteroids with single shots. The battle lasted 18 minutes. The Drakthari had not tried to outfight the defenders or outmaneuver them. They had simply absorbed the damage and kept coming. Plasma bolts that should have vaporized their bioships just made them glow brighter. Missile strikes made them sprout new armor plating that was harder than the old stuff. Commander Lisa Barnes used to call this the human approach to problem solving. When something hit you back harder, you hit it back harder still. When the enemy adapted to your weapons, you found bigger weapons. When bigger weapons did not work, you got creative about what counted as a weapon. The Council had never learned to think like that. Their military doctrine was about efficiency and conservation of resources. They fought wars to win objectives with minimal cost. They calculated acceptable losses and tried never to exceed them. Humans calculated how much they were willing to lose, and then doubled it just to be safe. The refugee stream started after Kepler station went silent. Entire star systems began evacuating their populations toward the core worlds. The highways between stars filled with civilian ships carrying everything people could grab before running for their lives. Dr. Amy Peterson had designed evacuation protocols years ago that assumed the worst possible scenarios. She planned for situations where people had minutes instead of hours to escape. Her procedures moved families and essential equipment first, then worried about personal belongings and luxury items later. The council had rejected her plans as too extreme and frightening. They preferred gradual evacuations that maintained order and dignity. People should not have to abandon their homes like animals fleeing a forest fire. Now the forest was burning and the animals were running whether it looked dignified or not. Engineer Sam Turner had modified shield generators to work in ways that council safety boards had banned. His shields could be overloaded to create feedback pulses that damaged anything touching them. The technique burned out the generators after a few uses but could save a ship from being boarded. Turner had also rigged engine cores to explode in controlled ways when ships were about to be captured. He called it denying resources to the enemy. The council called it wasteful destruction of valuable equipment. The Drakthari called it a minor inconvenience. They could digest the wreckage and use it to grow new bioships that were immune to whatever had destroyed the old ones. Pilot Jake Morrison had demonstrated something called a ramming attack during training exercises. He would accelerate his fighter to maximum speed and crash it directly into enemy ships. The impact destroyed both vessels, but sometimes took out targets that conventional weapons could not scratch. The council flight instructors had been horrified and banned the technique immediately. Pilots were valuable and took years to train properly. Throwing them away in kamikaze attacks was barbaric and inefficient. Jake had just shrugged and said that dead enemies could not shoot back at your friends. Sometimes the math worked out in favor of trading one ship for 10 enemy vessels. The Drakthari were learning that human math made no sense by normal standards. They expected enemies to value their own lives above victory. Species that fought to preserve themselves could be defeated by simply making the cost too high. Humans fought to preserve things they cared about more than their own lives. That made them much more dangerous and much harder to discourage. The bioships had no crews in any sense that other species understood. They were the crews. Each vessel was a single living organism that could think and fight and grow new capabilities as needed. They felt no fear and knew no mercy because they were not designed for such emotions. This should have made them perfect warriors, but it also made them predictable. They attacked the strongest targets first and consumed the most valuable resources. They followed patterns that efficient predators had used for millions of years. Humans had never been efficient predators. They were persistence hunters who could track wounded prey across continents. They were tool users who could turn anything into a weapon. They were social creatures who could coordinate attacks across multiple generations. Most importantly, they were crazy enough to hurt themselves if it meant hurting their enemies worse. General Marcus Davis had once explained human military philosophy to a room full of council war planners. He said humans did not fight to win battles, they fought to win wars. Individual engagements were just steps toward larger goals. Losing a battle was acceptable if it set up conditions for winning the war. The council planners had nodded politely and then ignored everything he said. Their strategies focused on winning each engagement with minimum losses. They planned campaigns like chess games where every piece had known values and movements. Davis had told them that humans played chess by flipping over the board and hitting their opponents with the pieces. The council representatives had laughed because they thought he was joking. Now the Drakthari were flipping over boards across half the galaxy and nobody was laughing anymore. The bioships moved through council space like they owned it. They consumed metal from destroyed stations to grow bigger. They absorbed energy from captured power plants to move faster. They learned from each battle and adapted their tactics accordingly, but they adapted the way efficient predators always adapted. They optimized for success against the prey they were currently hunting. They did not prepare for prey that might suddenly start hunting them back. Admiral Velthon watched another star system fall to the advancing swarm. His tactical officers updated their estimates of how long the core worlds could hold out. The numbers were not encouraging. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, humanity was fighting something that had sent the Drakthari running toward civilized space. The council could only hope that whatever humans were facing out there, they were giving it the same treatment they had always given their enemies: complete and utter hell. The Battle of Meridian's Gate was supposed to be the turning point. 3 combined fleets representing the finest military minds of 5 different species had gathered at the massive space fortress that guarded the inner systems. They had superior numbers, advanced technology, and perfect coordination between their forces. Admiral Quintar of the Cerulean Navy commanded the operation from his flagship. The battle plan had taken 6 weeks to develop and covered every possible scenario the war planners could imagine. Each ship knew exactly where to be and when to be there. The coordination was flawless. The Drakthari swarm arrived, 4 hours ahead of schedule, and destroyed everything in exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Williams had tried to explain human military thinking to the Council years ago. He said humans had 2 basic approaches to warfare. The first was to have a plan. The second was to have a plan for when the first plan went wrong. Then they had plans for when those plans went wrong too. The Council military doctrine assumed that plans would work if they were detailed enough and followed precisely. Their commanders spent months creating perfect strategies that accounted for every variable. When something unexpected happened, they would stop and make new plans. Humans assumed that everything would go wrong and planned accordingly. When their strategies failed, they switched to new ones without stopping to think about it. When those failed too, they made things up as they went along and somehow still won. The bioships came out of hyperspace in a formation that made no tactical sense. They were scattered across several light minutes of space with no apparent coordination. Some were moving toward the fortress while others seemed to be drifting randomly. A few appeared to be moving away from the battle entirely. Admiral Quintar ordered his forces to engage the nearest enemy clusters, according to the battle plan. His ships moved into their assigned positions and opened fire with everything they had. The plasma cannons and particle beams lit up space like a miniature star going nova. The Drakthari bioships absorbed the damage and kept coming. Some of them actually seemed to grow larger when hit by energy weapons. Others sprouted new weapon pods that fired, back with organic projectiles that moved like living creatures through space. Captain Nina Torres had once demonstrated human boarding tactics to a room full of shocked alien observers. Her Marines had cut through the hull of a mock enemy ship and fought their way to the bridge in under 10 minutes. They moved fast and hit hard and did not worry about following proper procedures. The aliens had been horrified by the violence and chaos of it all. Proper military operations were conducted with dignity and restraint. Soldiers should not behave like wild animals tearing apart their prey. Now the Council forces were learning what it felt like to be prey. The bioships launched boarding pods that moved like missiles with teeth. They chewed through hull armor and vomited aggressive organisms into the corridors of Council vessels. The alien crews tried to repel the boarders using standard defensive procedures. They sealed blast doors and set up defensive positions at key choke points. They called for backup and waited for reinforcements to arrive. The Drakthari organisms did not follow standard invasion patterns. They ate through bulkheads instead of using doorways. They attacked life support systems instead of trying to reach the bridge. They seemed more interested in consuming the ship than capturing it. Engineer Sam Turner had rigged ships to self-destruct when boarding was inevitable. His modifications would overload the reactor core and take any attackers with them. The Council safety boards had banned such devices as too dangerous to the crew. Turner had pointed out that dead crews could not be tortured for information or turned into biological resources for the enemy. Sometimes the choice was between dying quickly or dying slowly and taking your friends with you. The Council had insisted that there were always alternatives to such extreme measures. Civilized beings could find diplomatic solutions or at least honorable surrenders that preserved life and dignity. The Drakthari were not interested in diplomacy or honor. They were interested in converting organic matter into more bioships. Surrender just made their job easier. The battle plan called for the fortress to provide covering fire, while the mobile fleets engaged the enemy at maximum range. The fortress had enough firepower to destroy entire asteroids and shields that could absorb the output of a star for several minutes. The Drakthari ignored the fortress completely at first. They flowed around it like water around a rock and attacked the mobile fleets directly. Their bioships moved in patterns that seemed random, but somehow avoided most of the incoming fire. When the fortress finally did open fire, the bioships closest to it suddenly linked together with organic cables. The energy from the fortress weapons seemed to flow through the cables and distribute among all the connected vessels. Instead of destroying individual ships, the massive plasma bolts just made the entire group glow brighter. Pilot Jake Morrison had taught young Council pilots about something called aggressive maneuvering. He showed them how to use their ships like weapons, ramming enemy vessels when conventional attacks failed. He said that sometimes the best missile was a fighter with a brave pilot inside it. The Council flight instructors had forbidden such techniques immediately. Pilots were valuable resources that took years to train. Ships were expensive pieces of equipment that represented massive investments. Throwing both away in kamikaze attacks was wasteful and barbaric. Jake had smiled and said that expensive equipment was worthless if you lost the war. Sometimes you had to break valuable things to protect more valuable things. The math was simple, even if the emotions were complicated. Now Council pilots were learning that math lesson the hard way. Their elegant fighters with advanced targeting systems and sophisticated missiles were being swatted out of space by bioships that fought like angry beasts. The few pilots who tried, Jake's ramming tactics found that their ships could actually damage the enemy. The biovessels seemed unprepared for attacks that destroyed the attacker, as well as the target. They had no defense against enemies who were willing to die to hurt them. General Marcus Davis had once told the Council that humans never fought fair. When outnumbered, they used terrain to their advantage. When outgunned, they got closer where big weapons could not be used effectively. When surrounded, they broke through the weakest point and fought their way out. He said that fair fights were for sports and competitions. Wars were for survival, and survival had no rules except winning. Anything that helped you win was acceptable. Anything that helped the enemy win was forbidden. The Council had disagreed politely and continued using their traditional methods. They believed that civilized warfare required certain standards and limitations. Even enemies deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The Drakthari treated dignity and respect as weaknesses to be exploited. They consumed ships that tried to surrender just as quickly as ships that fought back. They saw no difference between military and civilian targets. They recognized only food and obstacles. Admiral Quintar watched his carefully planned battle fall apart in real time. His ships were dying faster than his tactical computers could process the damage reports. The perfect coordination he had worked so hard to achieve was becoming a liability as the enemy attacked his formations from unexpected directions. The bioships seemed to be learning and adapting even as the battle continued. Weapons that had been effective in the first hour became useless by the second hour. Tactics that worked against one group of enemies failed completely against the next group. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had written about this phenomenon in her studies of human warfare. She called it adaptive chaos theory. Humans could change their methods faster than enemies could adapt to them. They created uncertainty as a weapon and used confusion to gain advantages. The Council had dismissed her theories as too complicated and unreliable. Good military doctrine should be predictable and consistent. Strategies that changed constantly were impossible to coordinate and support properly. Now the Council forces were discovering that predictable strategies were easy for learning enemies to counter. The Drakthari were adapting to their tactics faster than they could modify them. Every advantage the aliens gained was quickly turned against them. The retreat order came after 4 hours of continuous fighting. Admiral Quintar had lost 60% of his forces and gained nothing except knowledge of how badly outmatched they were. The surviving ships pulled back toward the core systems while the bioships continued their advance. The Battle of Meridian's Gate became a symbol of everything wrong with the Council's approach to warfare. They had fought like civilized beings against enemies who were anything but civilized. They had followed rules that their opponents did not even recognize. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the galaxy, humans were fighting whatever had sent the Drakthari running toward Council space. The aliens could only hope that humanity was giving their enemies the same treatment they had always given theirs. No mercy, no quarter, and no rules except victory. The Council's territory had shrunk to just 12 star systems around the core worlds. Everything else belonged to the Drakthari swarm now. The bioships moved through conquered space like they owned it, which they basically did. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and the Council was running out of both time and measures. Commander Paul Anderson volunteered to lead the search mission into abandoned human space. He was not human himself, but had served alongside them for 15 years before they vanished. His ship Aurora had been modified with the best sensors and communication equipment the Council could provide. The crew was made up of volunteers from 8 different species. Dr. Helen Carter led the xenoarchaeology team that would study any human ruins they found. Communications Officer Danny Lewis specialized in quantum communication arrays and could decode almost any signal format. The mission was simple in theory and impossible in practice. Find out where humanity had gone and bring them back if possible. The Council needed their chaotic fighting, methods, and their willingness to break everything, including themselves, if that was what winning required. The journey to human space took 3 weeks through territories that used to be safe. Now they were full of Drakthari bioships that hunted anything that moved. The Aurora had to avoid 14 different enemy patrols and hide in asteroid fields twice to escape detection. The first human colony they visited was New Boston on the edge of what used to be human territory. The planet looked normal from orbit, but the cities were completely empty. No bodies, no signs of fighting, just empty buildings and silent streets. Dr. Carter led teams down to the surface to search for clues. The humans had left in a hurry, but they had taken time to shut down important systems properly. Power plants were in standby mode. Water treatment facilities were sealed but not damaged. It looked like an evacuation, not an invasion. The strange part was what they had left behind. Personal belongings were still in homes. Family pictures sat on tables next to half-finished meals. Children's toys were scattered in playgrounds where they had been dropped. It was like everyone had just disappeared in the middle of their normal lives. Marine Sergeant Beth Johnson had commanded the garrison on New Boston. Her office in the military headquarters was exactly as she had left it. Reports were still on her desk waiting to be filed. Her coffee cup still had dried coffee in the bottom. The only clue was a message written on her whiteboard in her own handwriting. It said, "Gone fishing in deep water, back when the big ones stopped biting." Nobody on the search team understood what it meant, but Dr. Carter photographed it anyway. The next colony was New Austin, the most remote human settlement anyone knew about. It was 3 days' travel from the nearest inhabited system, and had been used mostly for deep space research and early warning systems. If humans had left any clues about where they went, this would be the place to find them. New Austin looked just as empty as New Boston had been. The research stations were powered down but undamaged. The communication arrays were intact but silent. Whatever had happened to the humans, they had not been forced to leave by enemy action. Communications Officer Danny Lewis found the breakthrough in the main quantum communication center. Hidden behind normal message logs was a data cache that required human authorization codes to access. The cache had been programmed to activate only if someone came looking for humanity after they were already gone. The logs told a story that made everyone on the search team feel cold despite their heated ship. 3 months ago, human deep space monitoring stations had detected signals coming from beyond the galaxy edge. The signals were not natural phenomena or random cosmic noise. They were clearly artificial, and they were getting stronger. Captain Lisa Barnes had been commanding the patrol ship Defiant when the signals were first detected. Her reports described how the signals seemed to be scanning human space like a predator studying its prey. Whatever was sending them was intelligent and potentially hostile. The human military command had made a decision that surprised nobody who knew humans well. Instead of waiting for the unknown threat to come to them, they decided to go meet it first. Every human ship in the galaxy had been recalled and organized into a massive expedition force. The final entry in the log was from Colonel Frank Williams, who had been placed in command of the expedition. His message was typically human in its mixture of bravado and dark humor. He said they were going to poke the scary thing in the dark with a stick and see what happened. If it turned out to be friendly, they would make first contact. If it turned out to be hostile, they would shoot it before it could shoot them. The timestamp on the message showed it had been sent just 3 days before the Drakthari swarm first appeared in Council space. The timing was too close to be coincidence. Whatever humanity had gone to fight was connected to the bioships that were now consuming the galaxy. Dr. Carter found more clues in the personal logs of human colonists. Many of them had written about strange dreams in the weeks before the evacuation, dreams of vast shapes moving in the darkness between stars, dreams of hunger that could consume entire worlds, dreams of something ancient and patient finally, waking up after sleeping for millions of years that engineer Sam Turner had left detailed notes about modifications he had made to human ships before the expedition departed. The changes were extensive and disturbing. He had reinforced hulls with materials that could resist biological acids. He had modified weapons to fire at extremely close range. He had installed self-destruct systems that could be triggered remotely. Most disturbing of all, He had designed what he called integration protocols that would allow human technology to interface with biological systems. The notes were encrypted and incomplete, but they suggested that humans had been preparing to fight enemies that were part machine and part living organism. Pilot Jake Morrison had left a message for anyone who came looking for humanity. He said they had received a signal that was clearly a threat to all intelligent life in the galaxy. The source was something that had been sending out scout forces to test the defenses of nearby galaxies. The Drakthari swarm was just the first wave. Jake's message explained that humans had two choices. They could wait for the enemy to arrive and fight a defensive war that they would probably lose, or they could take the fight to the enemy and try to stop the invasion before it really got started. The decision had been unanimous among human leadership. They would gather every ship they had and launch a preemptive strike against whatever was sending the scout forces. If they won, the galaxy would be safe. If they lost, at least they would die fighting instead of waiting to be consumed. Dr. Carter's team found one more piece of evidence on New Austin. Hidden in the research station's quantum laboratories was a beacon that had been programmed to activate if anyone came looking for humanity. The beacon would send a message into the void beyond the galaxy edge, hoping to reach human forces wherever they were fighting. The message was simple and desperate. It told humanity that the galaxy was under attack and needed their help. It provided coordinates for the remaining council worlds and tactical information about the Drakthari advance. Most importantly, it begged them to come home. Commander Anderson made the decision to activate the beacon without waiting for authorization from the council. The situation was too desperate for proper procedures. If there was any chance that humanity was still alive out there, they needed to know what was happening to their former allies. The beacon sent its message into the darkness and then went silent. There was no way to know if anyone had received it or if anyone was still alive to respond. The search team could only return to council space and hope that somehow their message would reach human ears. The journey back to Nexus Prime took 4 weeks, because they had to avoid even more Drakthari patrols. The bioships were spreading through human space like a plague, consuming everything useful and leaving only emptiness behind. When the Aurora finally reached the council worlds, they found a situation that was even worse than when they had left. 3 more star systems had fallen to the swarm. The remaining fleets were falling back toward the capital world as fast as they could. Retreat Commander Anderson delivered his report to what remained of the council leadership. The news that humanity had deliberately left to fight some greater threat was both encouraging and terrifying. It meant they might still be alive somewhere. It also meant that whatever they were fighting was dangerous enough to scare humans into launching a preemptive war. The beacon they had activated was their only hope now. Somewhere in the void between galaxies, humanity was fighting a war that would determine the fate of all intelligent life. The Council could only wait and hope that their former allies were giving their enemies the same treatment they had always given theirs. Complete destruction or glorious victory, with no middle ground in between. The quantum beacon Dr. Carter's team had activated on New Austin sent its desperate message into the void for 3 weeks with no response. The council leadership had almost given up hope when the first reply came through on exactly the anniversary of humanity's disappearance. The signal was weak and distorted by the vast distance it had traveled. Communications Officer Danny Lewis worked for 6 hours to clean up the transmission enough to understand it. When he finally succeeded, the message was only 5 words long, but they were the most beautiful words anyone on Nexus Prime had ever heard. Message received. Coming home now. The voice belonged to Captain Alex Murphy, who had commanded a human cruiser before the expedition departed. His tone was different somehow, harder and colder than anyone remembered. But he was alive and he was coming back, which was all that mattered to the desperate council forces. The Drakthari had surrounded the last 3 council worlds and were preparing for final assault when the sky above Nexus Prime suddenly filled with ships. But these were not the familiar human vessels that had left the galaxy a year ago. These ships were wrong in ways that made people feel uncomfortable just looking at them. The hulls were larger and more angular than before, covered with what looked like organic armor plating that moved slightly as if it were breathing. Some ships had grown additional weapon ports that glowed with internal light. Others trailed cable-like appendages that writhed through space like living tentacles. For a terrifying moment, the council defenders thought they were facing a new enemy force. Then Captain Murphy's voice crackled across all communication channels with words that made everyone's blood run cold. "Council Control, this is the human fleet. Sorry we're late to the party. We brought some new friends and some new toys. Time to take out the trash." The ships that had once belonged to humanity alone now carried passengers that nobody could identify. Sensor scans showed life signs that were not entirely human, but not entirely alien either. Whatever humanity had found in the void beyond the galaxy, they had made some kind of alliance with it. Lieutenant Sarah Kim's voice came through on a secured channel that somehow bypassed all Council encryption. Her report was classified immediately, but rumors spread quickly through the remaining fleets. She described weapons that could crack planets and armor that grew stronger when damaged. She talked about humans who had learned to interface directly with biological systems. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was an extermination carried out with scientific precision and artistic flair. The returning human fleet moved through Drakthari positions like a knife through soft butter, cutting apart bioships that had seemed invincible just hours before. Captain Rick Stone's flagship had been transformed into something that was part machine and part living organism. Its hull rippled with organic patterns that channeled energy in impossible ways. When it fired its main weapon, the blast looked more like a living creature than a beam of destructive force. The weapon struck a Drakthari bioship that was larger than most space stations. Instead of exploding, the enemy vessel simply came apart like it was being dissolved from the inside. The pieces drifted away as harmless organic debris that posed no threat to anything. Other human ships had been modified in equally disturbing ways. Some had grown what looked like feeding tubes that could drain energy from enemy vessels. Others carried pods that opened to release swarms of small organisms that attacked bioships like antibodies, fighting an infection. The most disturbing sight was watching human crews work alongside their new allies. The partnership was too smooth and natural to be recent. Whatever agreements humanity had made in the void, they had been living and fighting together for months or years. Dr. Elena Rodriguez would have been fascinated by the tactical innovations she witnessed. Human ships no longer fought in traditional formations. Instead, they moved like a single organism with many parts, each vessel supporting the others in ways that seemed almost telepathic. When Drakthari bioships tried to adapt to the new weapons being used against them, the human fleet adapted faster. They switched tactics and armaments so quickly that the enemy never had time to develop effective counters. It was like watching evolution in fast forward. The bioships that had consumed 17 star systems and threatened to devour the entire galaxy lasted exactly 4 hours and 18 minutes against the returning human fleet. By the end of that time, every Drakthari vessel in Council space had been reduced to drifting organic matter. But the victory felt hollow to the Council observers. The humans who had returned were not the same people who had left. They moved differently, spoke differently, and seemed to think differently. Whatever they had experienced in the void had changed them in fundamental ways. Captain Lisa Barnes came aboard the Council flagship for the post-battle briefing. She looked human enough at first glance, but something was wrong with her eyes. They were too bright and seemed to reflect light that was not there. When she smiled, her teeth looked sharper than they used to be. Her report about the war beyond the galaxy was classified at the highest levels and shared only with the Council leadership. She described encountering something that called itself the Harvest, an ancient intelligence that had been consuming galaxies for millions of years. The Drakthari swarm had been just its latest hunting pack. The humans had found the Harvest in the space between galaxies where it had been sleeping between feeding cycles. Instead of running away or trying to negotiate, they had done what humans always did when faced with something bigger and more dangerous than themselves. They had attacked it directly and kept attacking until it stopped moving. The war had lasted 8 months by human time measurement. It had been fought in dimensions that had no names and using weapons that violated several laws of physics. Humanity had won by doing things that should have been impossible and refusing to accept that anything was truly unstoppable. But victory had come at a cost that was obvious to anyone who looked closely at the returning crews. The humans had learned to fight monsters by becoming something monstrous themselves. They had adapted to their enemies just as their enemies had tried to adapt to them. The technology they brought back was a fusion of human engineering and alien biology that created things the galaxy had never seen before. Ships that could heal damage by growing new parts. Weapons that became more effective the longer they were used. Armor that learned from each attack and became immune to similar weapons. Most disturbing of all were the humans themselves. They had integrated some kind of biological enhancement that made them faster, stronger, and more resilient than baseline human genetics allowed. They could interface directly with their ships and weapons in ways that seemed more like symbiosis than normal operation. Engineer Sam Turner demonstrated the new technology to a small group of council scientists. His ship systems responded to his thoughts and intentions without any visible controls or interfaces. When he wanted the weapons to fire, they fired. When he wanted the shields raised, they appeared instantly. The scientists were amazed and terrified in equal measure. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it required permanent biological modifications that could not be reversed. The humans had chosen to become something new in order to defeat an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The integration process was apparently voluntary but irreversible. Once a human underwent the enhancement, they could never return to their original biological state. They became part of their ships, and their ships became part of them in ways that made traditional concepts of individual identity meaningless. Captain Alex Murphy explained the situation to the council leadership in terms that were simple and direct. Humanity had encountered something that wanted to consume every living thing in the universe. They had stopped it by becoming something that could hunt the hunters. The harvest was dead and its hunting packs were scattered and leaderless. The immediate threat to the galaxy was over, but humanity had paid a price for victory that could not be calculated in ships lost or lives spent. They had given up their original nature to become something that could protect the things they cared about. The council chambers felt different when the human representatives returned to their seats. The 12 chairs were filled again, but the people sitting in them cast shadows that seemed too dark and moved in ways that did not quite match their physical forms. Ambassador Kate Sullivan smiled when she spoke, and her words were friendly and reassuring. But her presence felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with threats or hostility. She had become something that was designed to be the apex predator in any environment where predators might be needed. The galaxy was safe again, but safety had come with a price that nobody had expected to pay. The humans who had saved them were no longer entirely human. They were something new and powerful and strange, shaped by warfare against enemies that existed beyond normal space and time. The Council's desperate fight was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had to learn how to coexist with allies who had become something that could protect them from anything, but might also be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy.